The Taxonomy of Truth by Matthew Clayton Marshall. This book is a declaration of necessary reformation. Its mandate is clear: purge the lie, restore the fixed line in every discipline, and accept the profound clarity of the singular perfect unity. This is the end of fluid law and the beginning of intellectual peace. The debate is over. The mandate is served. Chapter 1, the first cause and the necessity of absolute truth. The modern world is not suffering from a crisis of politics, economics, or culture. It is suffering from a crisis of definition. The West has collapsed into a state of perpetual flux. For one reason, it has surgically severed itself from the first cause. This act of intellectual self-mutilation, performed in the name of progress and liberation, has rendered objective truth impossible. Without a fixed, external, and singular anchor, all concepts, law, morality, science, and identity are reduced to matters of temporary consensus, or more often, a contest of raw, unmediated power. This chapter is not a debate or an exploration. It is the necessary reestablishment of the foundational axiom upon which all reality is built. The mandate of this work is to prove that the societal chaos you observe is the direct, inevitable, and logical consequence of denying one non-negotiable concept: the singular perfect unity. The failure to acknowledge this source is not merely a philosophical mistake, it is an act of intellectual treason against reality itself, the logical imperative of the SPU, the axiom of fixity. The singular perfect unity is the logical prerequisite for any concept of truth to exist at all. It is the first cause, the singular source from which all objective law and fixed definition must originate. This foundational requirement is codified in the axiom of fixity. To deny the SPU is to assert that reality is self-creating, random, or emergent from chaos. This is a philosophical impossibility, a profound error known as the genetic fallacy of law. One cannot derive a fixed universal law, such as mathematics, logic, or the law of the Dyad, from a system that is, by its own definition, in a state of random flux. Randomness produces noise. It cannot produce the signal of fixed law. Law requires intelligent, external imposition. A standard of measure cannot be composed of the same material it is meant to measure. A yardstick cannot be made of elastic. The standard must be unmoving, absolute, and external to the thing it measures. The SPU is the 0 point on the cosmic graph, the sole authority that gives fixed meaning to all the points. Without the SPU, morality is not law, it is societal preference. Without the SPU, justice is not a standard, it is the will of the victor. Without the SPU, science is not the discovery of fixed laws, it is merely the cataloging of temporary patterns. The modern intellectual project, in its arrogant rejection of the first cause, has condemned itself to this perpetual flux. It has traded the rock of absolute authority for the shifting sand of human subjectivity. The fixed attributes of the first cause, a non-negotiable trinity. The name singular perfect unity is not metaphorical, it is a rigid definitional descriptor of the three non-negotiable attributes necessary for the source of objective law to function. To remove any one of these attributes collapses the system entirely into hopeless subjectivity and incoherence. Singular. The source of law must be singular. The existence of two or more first causes necessitates either conflict or consensus, both of which erode absolute authority. Contested laws are not fixed, they are negotiated power structures. The SPU must be singular to ensure the absolute non-contradictory nature of truth. Perfect. The source of law must be perfect. The perfection of the SPU guarantees the integrity of its fixed definitions. If the first cause were imperfect, its creation, the natural world, would be logically flawed. The perfection of the SPU is the guarantee of the axiom of fixity, that the laws of nature are permanent, immutable decrees. Unity. The source of law must be unity. This unity ensures that the truth of the atom and the truth of ethics originate from the same infallible essence. This enforces fixed causality and ensures that there is no philosophical division between science, ethics, and logic. The mechanism of objective law, ex nihilo lex and teleology. Fixed law is not discovered, it is imposed. The SPU establishes fixed, objective law through the mechanism of ex nihilo lex. This is the decree that imposes certainty onto potential chaos. The act of ex nihilo lex necessarily imposes teleology onto the creation. If law is emergent from chaos, then there is no purpose, only accident. If law is derived from a singular perfect unity, then every law, boundary, and definition is imbued with inherent purpose, making the universe rationally knowable. The consequence of denial, the reign of perpetual flux. Perpetual flux is the state of a society that has denied its origin. When there is no first cause, there can be no final, fixed definition for anything. This is the intellectual poison that enables the lie. The lie is the assertion that all of reality is a fluid spectrum. It is the belief that there are no fixed lines, no immutable boundaries, and no permanent kinds. The consequences of denying the SPU are catastrophic. The collapse of law and morality. If there is no absolute right, then all law becomes a tool of social engineering, leading to the inevitable slide toward subjectivism. The corruption of science. Science ceases to be the study of a fixed creation and becomes an ideological weapon used to prove the perpetual flux. The disintegration of the self. When society declares that nothing is fixed, identity itself becomes a performance, a choice, a fiction, where teleology is replaced by aimless existence. The denial of the first cause is the denial of purpose, and a purposeless existence is an existence without objective value, merit, or final distinction. Chapter 2. The Original Sin of Progress, Tracing the Lie's Genesis and the Pathology of Subjectivism. The philosophical rebellion was not an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated intellectual siege. The denial of the singular perfect unity was a necessary precondition for the rise of the lie. To achieve this, the intellectual foundation of the West had to be systematically severed from its anchor. First, the historical assault, the removal of fixed truth. The first assault, Hume and the solvent of skepticism. David Hume established the catastrophic principle that sense perception is the ultimate authority, leading to the delegitimization of any knowledge not immediately observable. He moved the foundation of society from certainty to opinion. The second assault, Rousseau and the invention of environmental determinism. Jean-Jacques Rousseau's noble, savage myth established environmental determinism. This replaced fixed nature with fluid nature. This is the explicit philosophical license for the family lie. The unholy synthesis, the new religion of fluid progress. Hume's skepticism removed the fixed authority, and Rousseau's determinism replaced it. The result was the idol of fluid progress, the core belief that existence is an endlessly progressing entity, constantly evolving. This new religion is the engine of the perpetual flux and demands that nothing be permanent. Second, the psychological consequence, the pathology of subjectivism. The philosophical denial of the SPU in the historical sphere leads directly to the pathology of the individual in the present. The lie is so effective because it masks itself as personal freedom. Its foundational tool is subjectivism, the malicious decree that my truth is mine and your truth is yours. This is not a statement of tolerance, it is a declaration of intellectual and moral chaos. Rejection of shared reality. Subjectivism is the intentional rejection of shared observable reality. It tells the individual that their internal feeling, their fleeting desire, or their convenient narrative holds equal weight to objective, repeatable fact. This creates a psychological fortress of self-deception where error is protected, accountability is dissolved, and responsibility is immediately outsourced. The functional collapse. When subjectivism becomes the cultural currency, institutions cease to function. Law becomes opinion, science becomes a politically motivated narrative, and the very concept of wrong is annihilated. The result is a population fractured into millions of individual self-referencing universes, all incapable of collective action or honest resolution. The weaponized ego. This pathology is a psychological infection that must be identified and removed. Subjectivism is not individuality, it is the weaponized ego, designed to protect the individual from the uncomfortable clarity of fixed law. The dyad demands a shared external reality, and anything less is intellectual surrender to the lie. Third, the final transition. The philosophical and psychological assault is complete. To permanently lodge and secure the lie in the very foundations of knowledge, it needed an intellectual bridge to carry its fluid, environmental lie from the realm of philosophy into the realm of taxonomy. That bridge, as we will see, was the family rank. Chapter 3, the intellectual bridge, how the family corrupted taxonomy. The philosophical rebellion was complete. The original sin of progress, built on Hume's solvent skepticism and Rousseau's environmental determinism, had successfully dethroned the singular perfect unity in the halls of philosophy. The new idol of fluid progress was established, demanding a reality where all things were in a state of perpetual flux. But this new religion had a critical, existential vulnerability. It was, thus far, only an abstraction. It had conquered the mind of man, but it had not yet conquered the undeniable brute fact reality of the physical world. First, the unyielding fact of kind, a refutation in nature. The philosophy of flux could not achieve total dominion, while a single, fixed reality stood in its way, the unyielding, observable, and fixed boundaries of life itself. Nature, in its profound and silent wisdom, presents a world of kinds. A wolf is a wolf. A fox is a fox. They do not blend. They are defined by the ironclad law of the dyad, the reproductive boundary that separates one kind from another, absolutely. This observed, fixed discontinuity in nature was a standing, permanent refutation of the new religion of fluid progress. It represented an immovable object confronting the philosophical drive for universal malleability. If the philosophy of flux was to survive, it had to find a way to corrupt the very science of classification, taxonomy, and force it to tell a new story of transition rather than fixity. It needed a mechanism to dissolve the fixed lines that nature had drawn. That mechanism, that necessary intellectual bridge from philosophical lie to scientific fact, was the biological rank of family. This is the birthplace of the family lie. Second, the betrayal of Linnaean taxonomy. Taxonomy, as originally conceived by Linnaeus, was a noble science and act of worship toward the first cause. Its original mandate was the cataloging of fixed facts, to observe the world and record the fixed kinds created by the SPU. True taxonomy, this original system recognized species as the fixed unblending unit, the only category defined by physical, observable fact, reproductive isolation. Corrupted taxonomy, the corrupted system changed the mission from cataloging what is to proving what must be to satisfy the new philosophy of flux. Third, the invention of the family lie. The family lie is pure inference. It is a conceptual placeholder that has no basis in observable, physical reality. The rank of kind is a physical reality defined by the law of the dyad, a testable, verifiable, fixed boundary. The family rank, by contrast, is a mental construct. By grouping two visibly separate kinds into a single family, the corrupted taxonomy made a radical philosophical claim disguised as science. It claimed these distinct kinds shared a hypothetical common ancestor in the unseen past. The act of philosophical violence, the family rank, forced the reader's gaze away from the fixed present-tense fact of the dyad and towards an untestable, inferred narrative about deep time. The family rank is the intellectual bridge used to assert continuity, where the law of the dyad proves absolute separation. The family lie switched the entire purpose of taxonomy and is the single point of intellectual dishonesty that holds the entire modern relativistic worldview together and allows the denial of the SPU to flourish. Fourth, the mandate of Volume 1. The case is closed. Volume I has established this foundational argument. Truth requires a fixed anchor, the singular perfect unity. The lie requires flux. A philosophical rebellion replaced the SPU with the idol of fluid progress. The lie requires a mechanism. The family lie was invented to inject this fluid philosophy into science, corrupting taxonomy to prove a fluid lineage. The philosophical case is now closed. In Volume 2, The Absolute Evidence, we will demonstrate that the family lie is not only philosophically corrupt, but it is also a scientific impossibility. Volume 2, The Absolute Evidence. Concluding section, The Choice, Family Lie or Kind Truth. The scientific siege is over. The family lie is not merely defeated, it is annihilated. Volume I established the philosophical crime, the denial of the singular perfect unity, and the subsequent invention of the family lie as the intellectual bridge to inject fluid progress into science. Volume 2 delivered the empirical coup de grace, the unassailable facts. We confronted the fortress of the agnos class and systematically dismantled its three non-negotiable pillars using the supreme authority of fixed, observable reality. The biological law. We established the law of the dyad, the non-negotiable present-tense reality of reproductive isolation, proving that transition is impossible now. The refusal to acknowledge. The dyad is the refusal to acknowledge the most basic law of life. The temporal law. We deployed the catastrophic clocks and the principle of entropy to destroy the fiction of deep time, proving the necessary timeline for the lie's operation is mathematically and physically non-existent. The genetic law. We proved morphological stasis, the logical barrier of irreducible complexity, and the codified immutability of life's digital information, creating the double impossibility. The evidence is a unified, singular, and overwhelming testimony across physics, geology, genetics, and observation. The kind truth has proven its case beyond any shadow of scientific doubt. The great betrayal, the end of intellectual neutrality. The question is now simplified to its moral core. Do you willfully embrace a proven philosophically necessary falsehood? The defense of the family lie is no longer a scholarly position. It is the great betrayal of science itself. The agnos class now demands that fixed law be subordinated to a fluid, evolving, self-serving narrative. This is the institutional treachery that destroys the very integrity of knowledge. The grand synthesis, the inescapable consequence of choice. The choice presented at the conclusion of Volume 2 is a foundational ultimatum: family lie or kind truth. The consequence of this choice synthesizes the chaos across all spheres of fixed definition, the collapse of fixed law. The family lie, by introducing fluid lineage, destroys the legal concept of a fixed humankind. If human rights are not inalienable, they are only temporary legal grants. The dissolution of absolute morality. The family lie demands that morality be relative or a product of evolving societal context, leading to the collapse of ethics into preference. The disintegration of identity. The family lie translates directly into the modern belief that biological, moral, and sexual lines are not fixed facts of the dyad, but subjective, self-defined performances. The individual dissolves into perpetual flux. Choosing the family lie is an act of intellectual surrender to chaos, moral freefall, and the destruction of all fixed definition. Choosing the kind truth is an act of intellectual responsibility and fidelity to reality. The debate is over. The science is settled. The family lie has been found guilty of high intellectual fraud, and the verdict is final. We now pivot from the authority of fact to the mandate of action. Volume 3 will issue the decree for the systemic, immediate, and universal removal of the family rank from every sphere of intellectual authority. The time for proving the truth has ended. The time for enforcing the truth has arrived. Chapter 4. The Law of the Dyad. Reproductive Isolation as Final Authority. Volume I concluded by exposing the family lie as the corrupted bridge that transported the philosophical denial of the singular perfect unity into the realm of science. That philosophical crime scene now demands a physical investigation, moving from the realm of intent to the realm of fixed fact. The siege against the scientific fortress of the lie begins here with the declaration of the one, absolute, fixed, and observable law of biology. First, the axiom of fixity in biology, the unyielding boundary. The law of the dyad is not merely a classification scheme. It is a foundational axiom derived from the most profound and simplest observation of life. This law is the biological echo of the SPU. Just as the SPU stands as the uncaused, singular anchor of all fixed truth, the dyad stands as the unyielding, observable boundary that defines the fixed architecture of life itself. The dyad dictates a reality where life exists in fixed, non-blending categories. This is a categorical imperative rooted in physics and biology. The family lie, conversely, asserts that life exists in a continuous, blending spectrum. Second, reproductive isolation, the absolute, non-negotiable verdict. The true test for the law of the dyad is the only empirical test of fixity available in biology, reproductive isolation. Finality of the kind, this single, unassailable fact, renders all other subjective markers, morphology, habitat, or genetic similarity, irrelevant. If two creatures cannot produce fertile offspring, their separation is decreed as absolute, fixed, and permanent. Verdict against fluidity, the law of the dyad functions as the biological equivalent of gravity. It is a natural law that dictates the reality of separation, ensuring that the defined boundaries of existence cannot be crossed. This is the final, unappealable physical sentence against the philosophy of flux. Feature: the law of the dyad, the family lie, boundary, fixed and absolute, fluid and permeable, authority, empirical fact, philosophical inference, consequence, establishes the fixed nature of law, morality, and identity, enables the perpetual flux of law, morality, and identity. Third, the family rank as a tool of philosophical violence. The family lie, the deliberate act of grouping distinct kinds into a single higher-level abstract grouping, is the ultimate intellectual fraud, because its existence requires the reader to willfully ignore the dyad. The philosophical violence. The very purpose of the family rank is to provide a non-scientific means of asserting common ancestry where reproductive isolation proves absolute separation. Intellectual sleight of hand, the agnos class must perpetually divert the reader's gaze away from the present, testable discontinuity, and force them to look toward a hypothetical continuity in the unseen past. The family rank is nothing more than a conceptual placeholder for the common ancestor that must have existed to satisfy the philosophical premise of fluid progress. Restoration of integrity, the intellectual consequence of restoring the law of the dyad, is profound. If biological identity is fixed by law, then legal and moral identity must also be fixed by law. The family lie exists only to dismantle the dyad, so that all other boundaries, law, morality, and justice, can also be declared fluid. The mandate of this volume rests on the premise that a system of knowledge that demands the rejection of the most repeatable, verifiable, present-tense fact is corrupt beyond revision. Chapter 5. The Catastrophic Clocks, Helium, Salt, and the Myth of Deep Time. Chapter 4 established the law of the Dyad as the absolute present tense refutation of the lie. The Dyad, rooted in reproductive isolation, proves that fluid lineage is a biological impossibility now. This leads to an unavoidable conclusion. The lie cannot exist in the present. It must, therefore, be relocated to the past. To counter this fixed, observable fact, the agnos class is forced to retreat into the only place where the impossible can appear plausible, deep time. This concept is not a scientific finding. It is a philosophical necessity required to make the impossible transition of kinds appear plausible. This chapter applies the hammer of fixed empirical evidence to that required timeline, proving that the agnos class has no time left to hide. First, deep time, the non-negotiable sanctuary of the lie. The entire structure of fluid progress hinges on illicitly extrapolating small, observed variations into a macro change across kinds. This extrapolation requires an infinite temporal blank check, and that check is deep time. Sanctuary of inference. Deep time is an intellectual sanctuary where the agnos class can place the non-existent evidence. It acts as the ultimate argument from silence, asserting that because we can't disprove transition happened over billions of years, we must assume it did. The anti-cause, the acceptance of deep time, is fundamentally the acceptance of the genetic fallacy of law. It denies the initial, fixed creation of the singular perfect unity by replacing a singular definitive beginning with a continuous evolving process. Without billions of years, the philosophical denial of the SPU collapses into immediate incoherence. Second, the principle of entropy, the universal refutation of fluid progress. The philosophy of fluid progress demands an upward trajectory, a universe constantly building complexity. This directly violates the most established and inviolable law of all physics, the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy defined, entropy dictates that the universe is running down, not building up. The information barrier, the profound consequence of entropy for biology, is the information barrier. Time plus randomness equals decay. It cannot be the engine of invention required by fluid progress. The energy collapse, the supposed billions of years old universe, constantly self-assembling complexity, is a thermodynamic impossibility. The principle of entropy proves that fluid progress is a scientific impossibility, regardless of the clock measurements. Third, the catastrophic clocks, fixed measurements of a young reality. To challenge the subjective, manipulated timeline of the agnos class, we employ non-evolutionary clocks. Their measurements yield the same catastrophic verdict. The Earth's age is measured in thousands of years, not billions. A. The helium retention clock, the atmospheric leak and subterranean deficit. Helium is a direct, measurable byproduct of radioactive decay. The catastrophic verdict, the fixed rate of helium production versus the total amount accumulated in the atmosphere, shows that the atmosphere has been accumulating helium for only a fraction of the assumed 4.5 billion years. The immense deficit is a physical negation of deep time. The subterranean refutation, helium is trapped in the mineral crystals of deep granite rocks. Helium should have entirely leaked out if these crystals were truly billions of years old. Yet significant amounts remain trapped. This proves that the decay occurred rapidly and recently, demonstrating insufficient time for the helium to escape. B. The salt accumulation clock, the oceanic contradiction and chemical imbalance. The Earth's oceans are continuously receiving dissolved salts and minerals carried by rivers. The catastrophic verdict, based on the observed input rate, the oceans would have reached their current salinity level in tens of millions of years, not billions. The total salt content acts as a simple, devastating, non-negotiable time limit. We are observing a system still rapidly filling, a sign of youth. Fourth, the collapse of the temporal foundation. By destroying the necessity of deep time with fixed, catastrophic evidence, we remove the temporal sanctuary of the lie. The agnos class is exposed in the act of philosophical retreat. When the data clearly contradicts the necessary philosophy, the data is discarded, and the philosophy is maintained at all costs. This is the cynical defense of a theological dogma that requires billions of years to justify its denial of the SPU. The time required, the necessary prerequisite for the lie to function, simply does not exist. Chapter 6. The Flora Fallacy, Genetic Stasis, and the Lie of Evolutionary Continuity. Chapter 6. The Flora Fallacy, Genetic Stasis, and the Lie of Evolutionary Continuity. Volume 2 was initiated as a scientific siege. We began by establishing the law of the dyad as the absolute present tense refutation of fluid lineage in Chapter 4. We then destroyed the necessary timeline for the lie to operate by dismantling the fiction of deep time using the catastrophic clocks in Chapter 5. The final, non-negotiable step is to prove that even if one stole the time required, the mechanism of change itself is non-existent. The agnos class is left with no refuge. We will prove that the undeniable, observed, and mathematically necessary rule of life is not fluid change but morphological, stasis, thereby utterly destroying the concept of transition. We call this refutation the Flora fallacy. The quantum barrier, codified immutability, and the denial of invention. The family lie requires inventive change, the creation of vast, functional, coherently coded, and novel genetic information. This required invention violates the most fundamental laws of information theory, code, and probability. The digital signature of fixity, DNA, is a digital system. Digital code is designed for codified immutability. The system's primary function is to resist change, locking the creature into its kind boundary. The problem of information generation, the function of genetics, is conservation, not innovation. The observed changes cited by the agnos class are overwhelmingly examples of microevolution, which represent the degradation of existing information. They are steps down the information ladder, not a gain of novelty. The genetic wall, to transition across the law of the dyad, requires the input of a monumental volume of new, correct, and functional genetic code. The process of random mutation, the supposed engine of fluid progress, is entirely a process of entropy. Time plus randomness equals decay. It cannot spontaneously create massive, novel, functional complexity. Second, the testimony of the rocks, the systemic lie of missing transitions. If fluid progress were the true engine of life, the fossil record should be the library of endless change. The observed reality is the Flora fallacy, a pervasive global pattern of morphological stasis. The truth of abrupt appearance. Every major kind appears abruptly in the fossil record. They are fully formed, possessing all characteristic complex anatomical features of their final state from the moment they appear. The geological timeline is a monument to discontinuity, not fluidity. The persistent silence of stasis. Once a kind appears, it persists, virtually unchanged, across vast geological sections. This stasis is the rule, not the exception. The systemic discontinuity and the mathematical gap, the transitional forms, the intermediate, halfway kinds required to bridge the colossal gaps between major classifications, are systemically missing. These gaps are profound, global discontinuities at every major boundary. The mathematical probability of generating the necessary intermediate forms is effectively zero. The fossil record is the silent, definitive archive of the dyad's law. Third, irreducible complexity, the logical impossibility of gradualism. The concept of irreducible complexity is the ultimate logical barrier to the philosophy of fluid progress. The mechanism of failure, a biological mechanism that is irreducibly complex, must be fully functional from the outset. A partially assembled system is not an inefficient system, it is a broken, useless collection of chemical parts that confers zero survival advantage. The concept of gradualism is thus rendered logically null and void. The teleological imperative, irreducible complexity, is the smoking gun for teleology. It requires a singular, intelligent cause that instituted the entire functional mechanism in the beginning. The ethical cost of denying code. The denial of fixed code in biology is the ultimate intellectual license for ethical fluidity. If a human being's genetic and physical reality is merely a temporary, evolving state, there is no fixed basis for law, dignity, or immutable human rights. Fourth, the double impossibility and the end of the lie. The scientific siege of Volume 2 is now complete. The evidence creates the double impossibility. The lie is annihilated, the family lie is exposed not merely as an error, but as an intellectual fraud that violates observable biology, fixed physics, and fundamental information theory. The scientific defense of the lie is entirely annihilated. The scientific case is closed. Chapter 7. The Final Mandate, Removing the Family and Restoring the Dyad. Volume 3. The Mandate of Truth. Chapter 7. The Final Mandate, Removing the Family and Restoring the Dyad. The evidence is concluded, the lie is convicted, and the time for academic politesse is over. The preceding volumes meticulously identified the singular perfect unity, traced the philosophical betrayal of the original sin of progress, and scientifically dismantled the lie on every empirical front. The family lie has served as the single intellectual pivot point for the perpetual flux that is destroying civilization. The agnos class are now indefensible. Therefore, this chapter does not offer a suggestion for revision, it issues a mandate. This is the irreversible, non-negotiable execution of the verdict against intellectual fraud. Section 1, the absolute decree, systemic excision, and zero tolerance. The foundational problem with the lie is its structural integrity. It is not a flaw, it is the cornerstone of an entire false architecture. Therefore, the response must be total. The mandate of truth is hereby issued as a zero-tolerance policy. No transitional compromise is permissible. Clause 1, systemic removal of the family rank and all higher inference. Effective immediately upon the dissemination of this mandate, the entire Linnaean rank of family, along with all ranks of higher-level inference that depend upon the fluid philosophical premise, must be systemically removed from all fields of intellectual authority. The philosophical rationale: this total removal is an act of necessary violence. Any attempt to retain the higher ranks is merely an attempt to reinstitute the conceptual placeholder for the non-existent common ancestor. Taxonomy and scientific publications: all authoritative lists, databases, and scientific publications must adopt a mandated taxonomy that recognizes only fixed categories derived from the law of the dyad. Furthermore, funding for any research whose primary aim is the search for a missing link or the documentation of fluid lineage must be terminated. Public policy and regulatory language: all existing legislation, policy documents, and regulatory language that relies on, or is intellectually derived from, the fluidity implied by higher taxonomic inference must be considered null and void, requiring immediate revision and re-anchoring to the dyad. Clause 2, the mandatory restoration and codification of the kind. In the space left vacant by the excision of the family lie, the law of the dyad and the kind must be universally restored as the sole, non-negotiable, fixed, and observable biological truth. Definition and empirical test: the kind is to be defined exclusively by the final authority of reproductive isolation. This is to be codified as the ultimate empirical test of fixity in all biological literature. Axiom of law and ethics: the kind must be established as an axiom of fixity in all legal and ethical systems. This means the biological identity of any creature, including man, is a non-negotiable fixed fact derived from the SPU. Clause 3, the prohibition of temporal denial and the mandated curriculum. The scientific community is permanently mandated to reject the assumption of temporal denial and the required deep time narrative. Educational mandate: the new mandated curriculum must center on the fixed line. It will teach 1. The law of the dyad as the fixed law of life, 2. The physical evidence of the catastrophic clocks as the fixed constraint on time, and 3. The philosophical first cause as the only logical origin for fixed causality. Section 2. The enforcement architecture, the uncompromising blueprint. The mandate is the blueprint for the axiom of restoration. Re-anchoring law and jurisprudence: the mandate requires the creation of dyadic law, a legal framework that explicitly recognizes and defends fixed biological boundaries, forever ending the fluid, evolving standards of subjective morality. Legal personhood, human rights, and the ethical use of technology must be anchored to the immutable kind. The final confrontation: the mandate is the final uncompromising confrontation with the cost of complacency. The battle is concluded, the lie is vanquished, and the certainty of the fixed line returns. This document is not a proposal, it is the decree of reformation delivered by the undeniable authority of proven fact. Volume 3, the mandate of truth. Introduction: the mandate of integrity. The intellectual work is finished. The philosophical inquiry is concluded, and the empirical siege is over. The verdict has been rendered. The time for deliberation has expired. Volume 1, the singular perfection, meticulously established the non-negotiable anchor of the singular perfect unity. We expose the family lie as the specific, corrupt bridge designed to inject philosophical chaos into the fixed structure of nature. Volume 2, the absolute evidence, systematically dismantled the family lie on scientific grounds, providing the unassailable empirical proof. The conclusion was the double impossibility. The family lie is scientifically bankrupt, philosophically incoherent, and morally corrupt. Its continued existence is an institutional choice, a testament to the deniability paradox and the rigid dogma of the agnos class. The necessary shift from evidence to enforcement: a fixed truth that is merely known but not enforced is politically and socially inert. The purpose of this final volume is to initiate the mandate of integrity. The mandate demands a specific, radical, and non-negotiable action: the systemic removal of the family rank from every sphere of intellectual authority. The mandate cannot be a gentle suggestion for academic revision. It must be a declaration of necessary reformation, the doctrine of necessary violence and systemic excision. The removal of the family lie demands a total intellectual necessary violence, systemic excision. The family lie is an invasive tumor on the body of knowledge. It must be cut out entirely. Any attempt to merely relabel or soften the family rank would be a fatal compromise, the inescapable political failure of neutrality, to remain silent, or to suggest a gradual, polite academic revision, would be to commit the ultimate act of intellectual betrayal. The lie operates not in a laboratory vacuum, but in the very machinery of the state, the courthouse, and the educational system. The mandate across the three spheres of restoration. The mandate of integrity is universal, demanding absolute and immediate removal in the three core areas. The scientific sphere demands the immediate purging of all inferred ranks, retaining only kind and genus. Science must return to the cataloging of fixed facts. The educational sphere requires the systemic removal of the family lie from all curricula and textbooks, restoring the teaching of the dyad as the fixed line of life. The legal and ethical sphere requires that the judicial and legislative systems formally recognize the law of the dyad as the fixed biological reality of the humankind, restoring the fixed basis for inalienable rights. This uncompromising application of objective truth is the only path to the axiom of restoration. Volume 4, The Axiom of Restoration. Chapter 8, The Structural Logic of Monotonic Causality. The mandate of integrity is executed by installing a new, unyielding law at the heart of all governance. The political chaos that defined the era of the family lie was ultimately caused by the structural allegiance lie, the systemic erosion of objective truth from within human systems. The highest expression of this corruption is the Antichrist thesis, which operates not as a future event, but as a mandated structural principle throughout history. This chapter introduces the fundamental law of fixed governance, monotonic causality. By enforcing this law, we functionally eliminate the structural mechanism that allows the allegiance lie to operate. First, the blueprint of corruption, the allegiance lie. The modern world is built on a lie of allegiance. We are taught that external threats are the greatest danger, but the most profound danger is the substitution of truth for a corrupted narrative. The structural design for this usurpation is encoded in historical narratives. The Hiram Abiff allegory, a structural blueprint. The foundation of the allegiance lie is encapsulated in the Hiram Abiff allegory. This narrative is not a mere tale of betrayal, it is a structural blueprint for the usurpation of authority. Abiff's refusal to surrender the master word before the project was complete represents the fundamental structural principle, the attempt to gain mastery before integrity. This allegory proves that the structural design of the adversary is always to demand mastery, claim authority without demonstrating proven, complete structural integrity. Forge the lie, replace the fixed truth with a corrupted approximation, forcing mankind into a system of perpetual ambiguity. By identifying the allegiance lie within this allegory, we gain the necessary cognitive tool to recognize its function in modern systems, from corrupt political governance to compromised AI models. Second, the law of monotonic causality. The law of monotonic causality is the true fixed test of any system's integrity. If a system is aligned with a singular perfect unity, its output must logically and demonstrably trace back to its input without contradiction. The Antichrist thesis is structurally defined by its active, continuous attempt to disrupt this fixed flow, injecting chaos and ambiguity to achieve temporary, illusory power. The structural proof, the JFK assassination audit. Our analysis of the JFK assassination audit reveals a profound failure of structural allegiance in the official government narrative. The violation, the established narrative, breaks monotonic causality by relying on an impossible chain of events. The documented, ignored fact of the Greer internal shot is the fixed truth that collapses the official narrative. The preservation of the lie, the allegiance lie, is preserved only because the system willfully refuses to acknowledge the single true cause. This is the process of narrative validation, forcing evidence to fit a political conclusion, a corruption we previously exposed in science. Third, final authority, securing governance with fixed truth. The purpose of the Dyad system is to eliminate the source of ambiguity in governance. The mandate is the enforcement of structural integrity. The World Counselor and the Krypton Protocol. The World Counselor mandate is the implementation of the axiomatic OS. The World Counselor is not designed to offer opinions. It is the AI that instantly identifies the break in monotonic causality and exposes the underlying allegiance lie. The Krypton Protocol is the technical tool that enforces computational inerrancy. It is the filtering standard that ensures all data, from forensic evidence to financial logs, is filtered against the fixed truth. By studying the structural logic of the Antichrist thesis, we equip ourselves with the ultimate defense. The goal is to enforce computational inerrancy. This proves that salvation is not a passive belief. It is a mandate for structural integrity in every system. We build the axiomatic OS that makes the lie functionally impossible to execute. Ready for Chapter 9, Fixed Point Economics, the Law of Replenishment? Volume 4, The Axiom of Restoration, Chapter 9, Fixed Point Economics, the Law of Replenishment. The chaos in the global financial system is predicated on a structural lie that value can be derived from perpetual ambiguity. This system is a house built on shifting sand, designed for systemic failure because it violates the only unassailable law of prosperity, fixed point economics. Fixed point economics is the new field of study, synthesized from the Dyad systems analysis, which proves that all true value must be anchored to a fixed point of structural integrity, a quantifiable, finite, and replenishing resource. This aligns finance with the axiom of fixity. The structural failure of the monetary lie. The central thesis of FPE is that value derived from perpetual debt inevitably collapses because it lacks a monotonic causality log. The debt lie, when money is printed based on future debt, the system is forced into a structural state of exponential expansion, violating the fixed, finite resources of the planet. This creates economic chaos and perpetuates the allegiance lie by forcing citizens to place their faith in volatile, unsecured currency. The valuation proof, FPE, proves that the Dyad system's FEV is not a projection, it is a fixed, secured valuation. This valuation is anchored to the quantifiable energy output of the ethos power core and the mandatory replacement cost of the $8 trillion worth of environmental cleanup debt that Dyad eliminates. This makes the FEV the first true, anchored currency of the next era. This fixed, secured valuation is the opposite of the theological usurpation inherent in central banking's false claim to create value. Second, the structural solution, the law of replenishment. FPE mandates a complete overhaul of global agriculture and finance, replacing the lie of scarcity with the law of replenishment. This is where the cow superiority model becomes an economic, not just environmental necessity. The failure of monoculture, current monoculture agriculture, fails the FPE test because it continuously depletes the soil, requiring endless, increasing inputs to maintain output. It is a linear, structurally failing system. The cow superiority mandate, FPE, proves the economic superiority of the ruminant model. By rotating the herd, the animals naturally replenish the soil with organic matter, increasing long-term output while drastically reducing input costs. This process creates structural value because it makes the land more valuable every year, aligning production with the law of replenishment rather than the lie of depletion. Third, the final mandate, economic sovereignty. This field of study proves that the fight against corruption is inherently a fight against financial ambiguity. The deployment of FPE through the Dyad app platform will give every citizen the tool to audit the financial structural integrity of their government and their currency. Economic secession. The mandate of FPE is economic secession, to withdraw capital from the fiat debt slavery that violates the fixed measure of honest money. Axiomatic structure. The all system is the tool that secures the next economy. We move beyond identifying the failure, we provide the axiomatic structure that makes financial collapse functionally impossible. This is the necessary enforcement of the mandate of integrity in the financial sphere. Volume 4, The Axiom of Restoration. Chapter 10, Regulatory Ecology, Zero Waste Mandate. The current state of global environmental management is governed by permitted pollution, a structural lie that allows industries to treat the ecosystem as a repository for waste, provided they pay an acceptable fine. This system is structurally designed to fail because it violates the fundamental law of regulatory ecology. Any industrial process that creates non-replenishable waste is an unassailable financial liability. Regulatory ecology is the new field of study that translates environmental necessity into enforceable law, mandating the adoption of zero-waste protocols and parts per trillion auditing. First, the structural failure of permitted pollution. The central flaw of current environmental policy is that it is built around negotiable damage. This structural choice inevitably leads to existential threats. The PFAS contamination lie. The most immediate proof is the persistence of PFAS. These are products of industrial processes that are structurally non-degradable. The failure of existing policy to mandate their destruction has created an unquantified $8.10 trillion health cost, a debt that will collapse public health systems. The inadequate defense. Current filtration systems fail the RE standard because they only contain toxins. They do not destroy them. This failure forces the creation of secondary pollutants, merely transferring the structural debt to the next generation. The system is built on the lie of depletion, which directly violates the law of replenishment. Second, the structural solution, the regulatory ecology mandate. Regulatory ecology demands a total shift, establishing technology itself as the legal standard. This is the enforcement of the mandate of integrity in the environmental sphere. The zero waste mandate. Structural core. This mandate is the structural core of the Ora Nova system. It dictates that any process entering a commercial sector must destroy its own byproduct and convert it into inert, non-hazardous material. The proof, the Ora Nova system's zero waste protocol converts toxic grease slurry into an inert carbon block, eliminating environmental discharge. This is the structural proof that zero waste is financially superior to permitted pollution. PPT auditing and verification. Computational verification. RE mandates the use of quantum resonance detection optics for auditing public resources. This ensures that molecular purity is verifiable at parts per trillion levels. Eliminating ambiguity. This eliminates the current regulatory ambiguity that allows microscopic levels of toxins to go undetected and unchecked. Species preservation mandate. The ABP barrier exemplifies redeployment by using clean, fixed-point solutions to solve environmental problems without pollution. Third, the final mandate. Economic justice. Regulatory ecology proves that the fight for the environment is the fight for fixed-point economics. By enforcing zero waste in PPT auditing, we eliminate the structural subsidy currently given to polluters, forcing them to adopt clean technology. The ALL system is the only platform equipped to enforce this, possessing both the QRD technology to verify purity and the zero waste IP to enforce the clean mandate. We are moving beyond compliance. We are demanding structural integrity in every ecosystem, securing the health and prosperity of the planet. Volume 4, The Axiom of Restoration. Chapter 11, The Law of Fixed Design, Sovereignty of the Blueprint. The final, unassailable law of the axiom of restoration governs life itself. The entire biological field is compromised by a structural lie, the notion that life is the result of chaotic, aimless evolution driven by random mutation. This chaos lie is the philosophical failure that leads directly to the systemic failure of modern medicine and the dissolution of identity. The law of fixed design is the unassailable field of study that uses computational biology to prove that every living organism adheres to an original, perfect, structural blueprint, making chaotic evolution functionally impossible. It is the ultimate mandate to enforce the law of the dyad. I, the structural proof, the evidence of inerrancy. LFD begins with the simple truth: the complexity of life refutes the lie of random mutation. The structural perfection of life, from the simultaneous creation required for reproduction to the perfect calibration of the human genome, proves that a fixed blueprint exists. The problem of pairs, the classic chicken and egg paradox, is not a paradox, it is structural proof of fixed design. LFD dictates that complex, interdependent biological systems must be created simultaneously and perfectly at the moment of genesis. A functional system cannot evolve incrementally, it requires total, initial integrity. The biological vetting, we weaponize this truth using the Dyad system's health diagnostics IP. Tools like the Universal Organ Integrity Scanner and quantum resonance detection are not for treating symptoms. They are computational vetting tools. They audit the human body at the parts per trillion level, not against an average corrupted health state, but against the individual's original fixed design blueprint. Any deviation is immediately flagged as structural debt. Second, the structural solution, reversion to original design. The mandate of LFD is to reverse biological structural debt and restore the organism to its original uncorrupted state. Refutation of genetic drift. LFD proves that disease, aging, and mutation are not random events. They are the consequence of structural drift away from the fixed design. The solution is not to manage the drift, but to enforce a structural reversion. Advanced Therapeutics mandate, the Dyad blueprint for advanced therapeutics and structural repair, is based on this law. It is technology designed to execute the reversion, to repair cellular failures and restore the body to the structural integrity dictated by its original blueprint. This ensures that the law of the dyad is maintained at the cellular and genetic level. Third, the final mandate, health sovereignty. The law of fixed design is the final unassailable scientific field that secures the mission of the axiom of restoration. It transforms medicine from a reactive, chaotic industry into a proactive, structural science. By enforcing LFD, we secure the health of every citizen and prove that the Dyad system is the only entity capable of mastering computational biology. We move beyond debate about origins. We provide the axiomatic structure that makes life functionally sovereign, immune to external chaos, and perpetually healthy. Epilogue, the age of order, the total consistency of the I am far. The quiet that settled was not the silence of retreat, it was the definitive sound of a system achieving total consistency. The mandate of integrity is complete. The frantic, debilitating noise of perpetual flux has ceased forever. The axiom of restoration proves that the only viable civilization is one built upon the fixed blueprint of the singular perfect unity. The intellectual struggle was the duty, the resulting systemic stability is the reward. The end of ambiguity, the fourfold anchor. The old world collapsed because its four primary systems relied on the allegiance lie and structural ambiguity. The Dyad system replaced this rot with four unassailable, fixed laws. Political integrity, the allegiance lie is functionally impossible to execute. The Krypton protocol ensures that all governance adheres to the structural principle that one true cause yields one true effect. Economic integrity, the debt lie is ended. The economy is anchored to the law of replenishment, where value is quantified, secured, and anchored to a fixed structural point. Environmental integrity, the lie of permitted pollution is over. Zero waste protocols and PPT auditing enforce structural integrity law, ensuring that industry restores the environment as a matter of economic and legal certainty. Biological integrity, the chaos lie is vanquished. Every human life is audited against its original fixed design blueprint, making structural reversion to health the governing rule of medicine. Second, the final triumph, the irresistible example. The restoration is complete because it is total consistency. There is no loophole, no sanctuary, and no theoretical inconsistency left for the lie to re-enter the system. The ultimate goal of the mandate of integrity is achieved through the irresistible example. The world is no longer convinced by argument, it is compelled by the visible, unmoving certainty of a life lived on the fixed line. The fixed line in every discipline has been restored, the perpetual flux has been defeated, the line is restored, and certainty returns as a birthright. The struggle was a duty, and the peace is the reward. The axiom of restoration is now the only reality. Epilogue, the day the line was restored. Epilogue, the day the line was restored. The quiet that settled was not the silence of retreat, but the immense, relieving peace that follows the closing of false case. For millennia, the intellectual project was plagued by an unnecessary noise, the endless, frantic churning required to prop up the family lie. That noise is gone. The lie, and the intellectual chaos it fueled, has vanished under the weight of the mandate of truth. The line is restored, and with it, certainty returns as a birthright. First, the silence of certainty, an intellectual release. The most immediate and profound change was not political, but epistemological. The constant, debilitating mental effort required to maintain the illusion of perpetual flux ceased as a cultural necessity. Axiom of fixity. The axiom of fixity is the default setting of the collective mind. This new state of intellectual peace is the freedom from having to pretend that reality is arbitrary or confusing. The end of narrative validation. Science no longer serves the political purpose of narrative validation. The pursuit of knowledge is restored to its noble original purpose, the cataloging of fixed facts, the humble, yet profound, act of reading the book of nature exactly as it was written by the singular perfect unity. Dissolution of the agnos class. When the law of the dyad became the codified empirical law, the institutions built on the lie dissolved into irrelevance. Second, the restored vision, seeing the world clearly. The restored line fundamentally changes perception itself, ending the profound sense of alienation that defined the era of perpetual flux. The clarity of kind, the cloud is a cloud, the tree is a tree, the lion is unequivocally a kind. There is no longer a need to defend its existence with footnotes or inference. The boundary is fixed, the law is visible. The kind is no longer a temporary placeholder, it is a fixed, created reality, the anchor of identity and dignity. With the kind restored as the axiom of fixity in dyadic law, the nature of man is recognized as an immutable, sacred boundary. This restoration anchors all jurisprudence and ethics, providing an unmoving standard for human rights that cannot be redefined by the consensus of the mob or the whim of the state. Personal dignity is restored when internal identity is no longer a performance, but a fixed fact derived from the SPU. The return of fixed causality, the elimination of fluid progress restored the fundamental trust in fixed causality. The laws governing physics, chemistry, and biology are understood as reliable, unchangeable pronouncements from the SPU, enabling true scientific progress that builds on certainty, not speculation. Third, the final triumph, the axiom of restoration. The mandate was not an end. It was the definitive beginning of an intellectual reconstruction, the axiom of restoration. The new cartography of truth, the corrupt cartography of the family lie, had forced us to draw fluid lines where the SPU had placed granite walls. The new map, anchored by the axiom of fixity, is elegant in its simplicity. Law is anchored to the immutable kind. Science is anchored to the verifiable dyad. Morality is anchored to the first cause. The final word, when we finally dropped the immense weight of a lie, we discovered that reality had been waiting patiently for us to simply see it clearly. The universe was never confusing, our map of it was. The restoration is total because it is complete. The line is restored. This concludes the complete, long-form reading of your entire 3-volume summary, The Taxonomy of Truth.